No.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I don't know. Little earmuffs in case they get cold. I guess so.
Well, you just. No, it's just. It's just.
Worry about that. Brad, hey, they said we're all set. We're live. We can get started.
Okay. To begin. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Warren Planning Board, Monday, April 24th, 2013. Present are Brett Bovine, Ashley Medeiros, Tyler Dixon, Brett Massey, and Jim Lefferts. Matt Atwood is an excused absence. He had contacted us earlier to let us know he would be out of town. And Mike Gerhardt is not here. We do have a quorum. The purpose of this meeting is to review and discuss draft material for the comprehensive plan update and to receive public input on that plan, and specifically, in this case, the historic and cultural resources section of the plan. Our intent is to do this with each element. In some cases, we may be able to do this a number of elements at one meeting. But given that this is the first time that we've done this, we're going to focus on the historic and cultural resources tonight. If we have a little time, I mean, nothing good happens after 9 o'clock, and quite frankly, after 8:30, as far as I'm concerned. So, we'd like to keep it within that period. And also, I think most of all of the folks who are here tonight are specifically interested in the historic and cultural resources section. So moving forward, again, to make it clear, what we're looking to do is in the iteration that is on the town's website, which is dated April 16th, 2023. This is a draft that is intended to be massaged, changed, moved around, added to, reduced from. However, what we are primarily looking for at this point, in terms of our discussion, are the goals and the followed by the complementary policies, implementation, time frame, and priority. Primarily the goals, policy, and implementation action. Those are the ones that we really want to focus on, because those are the ones that are critical to the statewide planning and the approval of our plan ultimately. This piece reflects some review of the past plan. It also reflects some of the work that was done on an earlier draft. So let's just go over the goals to start with. And I know there are some typos here as well. For example, retain community character and local heritage through the protection, restoration, and reuse of historic and cultural resources. Anybody got a concern about that, of something that should be added, subtracted, positioning? If not, let's move on to the next one. increase appreciation for and awareness of the town's historic resources and historic preservation policies and program.
Brett, if I could,
Sure.
in regard to the goals, so if you'll notice there, the first one, was in our original draft element that went to statewide planning for comments. So last year, the planning board had submitted 3 draft elements to statewide planning. That's the approach statewide planning recommends, instead of waiting till the end of the process of drafting all the elements and going through a public hearing process, send it to them for initial review first while you're drafting the elements. So in regards to the historic and cultural resources element, statewide planning, their comment was that the one goal was not sufficient in adequately ensuring that our plan, the state has their own basically comprehensive plan. They call them state guide elements for a lot of these different topical areas. So their state guide plan, our plan has to be consistent with their state guide plan, has to adequately demonstrate that we are also pursuing and helping to achieve the goals of the state's plan. So specifically in regard to our goals, they said to add additional goals that fully embody and address the state's goals, and specifically a goal that ensures equity and representation in preserving and accessing historical resources within the community. So these 2 elements that were added are trying to address that state comment.
So what do you think that meant, the equity and access? I mean, we've been thinking about the fact that we have town assets like the cemeteries, the Joyce Street buildings that are accessible and are equitably available for people to use or to appreciate. But do you think there's more than that to what they're saying?
Well, I think.
Representation and preserving and accessing that all cultures maybe are represented in the historical, so like the heritage and cultural celebration and historical.
The whole story. And, what I mean?
Well,
in my
equity,
case,
yeah.
it would be immigration would be one part of the story. But that's the story. That's not the physical assets.
Well, it says in preserving and accessing
Okay.
in the preservation.
I mean, there's other things like, the walkabout and, the holiday festival that feature historic assets. And those are all equitably available. You don't have to pay or anything like that.
Yeah, I think those, would fall under the goal, share and celebrate Warren's heritages and cultural traditions. They would also fall under the educational aspect, increase appreciation and awareness of, which to me is education. It's a matter of ensuring that we're encouraging the town to do that it would, ideally, for example, getting all 3 historic groups or 4, depending on how you count them in the town, together and operating together would give greater
We
volume and
are
power.
with the historical board umbrella. You seen our website where the Fire Museum, the Masons, the Massasoit group, the Warren Preservation Society, and the Fire Museum have a shared website with hours of, the few hours that places are available and contact information. And then also on Facebook now we have a page where we do 10 postings a month of different things from our collection. And we've also worked on digital exhibits. There's one on Henry Cady that has materials from WPS and from the library, and another one from Mary Merchant, where that was another joint project.
Well, again, I think those are, how do we take, how do we make that information? 'Cause that's the first I've heard of it, so how do we, that fits, I believe, within these goals that we have.
Examples of what we should be doing.
Oh, right, and I think that then moves into the policy of, what are the policies? Does the town actively encourage and support that activity? Does the town's website have a link, for example, to that? I mean, that to me is what,
And the other thing in terms of festivals is, it's become an annual event for the Poconos to have one in August. And also, the Historic Warrens has had a booth at the Cohog Festival. So those are other opportunities for people to get educated and know what's available.
yeah, again, I think that the key here is to keep it as how much, what the town itself can do. We don't want to necessarily get involved in the machinations of the individual groups. What we want to do is say, here's an umbrella. If you want to know what's going on, if you want to connect with that, here's how to do it. And one of the fortunate things that we have is, the internet now. I mean, it used to be that we would have to have brochures or whatever that would go out. So, or the newspaper, which, it's tough to count on that,
And utilizing Warren Connect app. It's another tool of increasing awareness, because we can send out notifications about these kind of events and.
What is, can you elaborate a little on the Warren Connect?
Well, it's an app.
Yeah.
It's actually, we've hired a company to run the app, and so it's an app called Warren Connect. And through that app, you can either solicit information from the town directly, or the town actually push information to you, depending on whether you opt in or opt out. So in a situation where you want to inform the community of a specific event, the Warren app is a technical tool that we can use now. So it is going to be a huge benefit for the community on both sides of that, pushing the point.
Yeah, no, I mean, I still go to the website to get my information. So
Add
I,
that to the resource.
Sign, the branded sign right in front of town hall, where you can scan things.
yeah, well, I mean, you're dealing with a Luddite here, and as are a lot of the people in the town. So, it is, I mean, that's fantastic.
The point was, the old days, it was paper.
Right.
It came to the board, and now we're using these technical resources to further reach out.
So that would be one. The other would be the connection to the historic.
Historic website.
Yeah, what's the name? Is there a specific name for it or
Historic
I think
That's
we have that one. on.
catchy?
Yeah.
I like that.
We have that on, so like under the reports and online resources, so we could add the app, but historic warrants on there, discovery warrants on there, the heritage. Historical coastal communities. Historic preservation, in the town of Warren 250, and state legislative preservation reports Warren are all listed as the reports and all.
Historic Warren. Okay, yeah. What we might want to do there, I mean, these are, I'm assuming that these are live links on the, when you're looking at it electronically.
Those would be in an appendix, right? Essentially.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that we're trying to work out, how do you want to make it available, but I think an appendix makes it, so that you're not
You don't see it.
bogging down in one thing. At the same time, we want it to be available. And people tend to think of appendixes as something that nobody ever looks at, and that's unfortunate, but I mean, as a what?
We don't call it appendix.
Yeah, well, we could call it the really important stuff that you should have read, you damn fool.
Yes.
Yeah. New, improved.
Resources, but
Yeah, no, the language can be important. I mean, I'm one of those knuckleheads who reads appendixes and books and histories, because I like the stuff at the end, but yeah, Jameson.
speaking of language, there is a tendency with these comprehensive plans to use I would call them weak verbs. Words like consider, enhance, encourage, etc., which ultimately have no meaning or value.
I agree.
Whatsoever.
Must as opposed to should.
Right, so,
Definitive.
so if you go, and actually, if you look at that state outline, the state guidelines for the historic resources, they don't use words like that. They use words like preserve, invest, et cetera. Very, actional verbs. And that, so we just have to be conscious of that as we go through the whole plan in general. And to that effect, I would go to the first goal here and sort of split it and begin it with the word protect. So that's where the sentence should start. Protect, restore, and reuse historic and cultural resources to retain community character and local heritage. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, so it
gives more.
through the protection, you start off with the active
Exactly.
verb.
Just,
Yeah.
I mean, even though none of it will ever be followed.
No, but I get it.
Like,
That's,
So like
that's,
what happened in the last plan with the historic preservation, and I think we all talked about this. There, that voluntary piece really, and I think we tried to get rid of that
Yeah,
in
we're
here
trying.
to make sure,
Yeah.
because like, there was a lot of very loose language that really was hard to follow, because it was that like,
And it's-
of like what it is voluntary, that it seems
Right.
to mean, and so I think that was one of the things that we did want to address in this, so that we're not thinking like, what are these
Yeah, so.
suggestions?
So that's the first.
yep,
And then in the second one, again, increase, I would switch, as I had in my notes there, appreciation and awareness, because you can't bring the appreciation until after you gain the awareness. But, again, it's weak, I don't know what the action verb should be there, but it really,
yeah, I mean, educate or promote. I mean, those are more
needs more backbone, because
actively promote.
to actively promote it, whatever that verb might be,
Okay.
Source is a great tool.
I guess also consider there's policies too that have some of that language, that the tone that you're speaking to.
Right.
So like, just wait, what did you just say, Fred? What was it?
Actively
Actively
promote
promote.
appreciation for.
Our goal isn't to actively promote. Our goal is to increase appreciation for, and we do that by actively promoting, and that's the actionable. So the goals, policies, and action items are worded a little bit differently.
Yeah.
So I guess I
That's a good point.
So anyway,
Well, again, I mean, the key here, and I think what we're all agreeing on is that we do not want to leave room for a lot of wiggling about in terms of what we're asking for. It's more of a demand than a request. I mean, ultimately, that to me is how I would look at it.
and it's a 20-year goal. I mean,
Right.
so, we may not get to it this year or in a few years or whatever, but it's out there so that we have the ability and the designation and the tool to do it, if and when we muster the political will to actually do it, whatever it might be.
Well, there's, in this one, certainly protect, restore, and reuse. I think that is an important way to start that first goal.
I can, switch those
Yeah,
words, just
because,
if you prefer it
I
that
mean,
way.
That is
That would make-
something,
That would then make the goal, just so you know, like, the goal is to protect, restore, and reuse. that.
yeah, right.
Exactly.
So you
Yeah.
want that.
So it's
But
just,
yeah.
the words are there, but
Emphasis.
yeah, and that is, it's important. I mean, I think education could appear here somewhere. I'm a great believer in that. I think increasing appreciation and sharing and celebrating is all well and good, but if people are educated,
And along with awareness and appreciation, I would add the third A word, which is advocacy, to advocate. To protect the town's resources and so forth. Just again, because it needs.
I mean, is that, how do you, I'm deferring to Allison in part because I want to be sure that,
Throw these out as.
right, but I agree. I mean, I think words like educate, advocate, those have power, and it's,
I think that could be like an action. So like when I write goals, you know, they're like an umbrella and they're supposed to be broad so that multiple actions and can fall under them. So if you're too restrictive in them, then you're actually sometimes doing what you don't want to do because then you're excluding other things. So if we keep it some of the language broad and then you look at the action items and you put some of those under the implementation action in the policy, that's, you know, where you can kind of get more specific to achieve certain.
yeah, I mean,
outcomes.
and I agree, I think that, I mean, that, and that's where you were going, Allison, right? I mean, it's,
Right.
you know, I think it's, well, let's see how you massage this thing.
Yeah,
Because I
Because the
do
goal
want to
is-
see that.
I'm sorry, the goal is to retain community character and local heritage.
that's
So
how
that's
I
the goal.
see
That's
it,
what we
yeah.
want. That's why, it like,
Yeah.
it's that like start with why. Why are we doing it? Because we want to maintain and retain the heritage and character of the community. And then how are we doing it is the action items. That's kind of like the way to think about goals and then like objectives.
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, those two statements, whether you put protect, restore, and reviews at the front or in the middle, you do have what, you know, here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to retain this, and here's the action. So could each goal have that construction?
Well, I think that on this first goal, there is a critical distinction between the two, even though they can be harmonious. But the way it's written now, if you have retained community character, that opens to a wide subjectivity, like, and not to open things of the past, but the 119 applicants were arguing that they were retaining community character. So like, you know, that would be. Right, so it's very subjective. If the goal really is to protect, restore, and reuse, we should probably make that the goal. And like, you know, and the basis or the motive for the goal behind it being to, by retaining community character and other things, you know, historical
Yeah.
integrity and stuff
Well
like that.
said.
But I think
That's
that,
I think that's a great point, because, you know, we want this document to be as precise and definitive as possible, because it's all interpreted, right? And, you know, so what you end up with people coming in and they're selling their interpretation of what this is. So if it's not kind of locked down to an extent, then.
and I think
for
different,
wide-
yeah.
the wider interpretation.
different goals would read differently. I think the other two are broader in to where, you know, like, along the lines of what you're saying.
Is there anything as far as from these goals that you think is missing?
Of
Is there-
buildings, I mean, should buildings, because this is historic and cultural resources, you know, we're actually talking about bricks and mortar in a number of cases.
Well, cultural resources, no. Yeah, resources. aren't so much brick and
No, that's what I'm saying. The cultural resources is fairly broad, even historic resources. I mean, you could point to a historic resource and say, well, that well on the shores of the Kickamuit is a historic resource, but have we actually said in the goals, we want to protect all these houses that date, you know, to whatever. So structures or buildings.
like historic neighborhoods and the feel, the character, as far as the development pattern, historic.
Yeah, well, I think
development.
there's two things. One is neighborhoods, you know, the nature of a neighborhood, because we'll get into this in another element. How do you preserve a neighborhood, you know, where people want to come in and build, you know, 4-story houses that are way bigger than the lot size, or, you know, want to take an area that's nicely residential and jam in density. I mean, I think those are, so neighborhoods, but, and I also think buildings, some,
Like traditional vernacular, the traditional, yeah,
yeah,
that like what I'm getting.
okay. Yeah, that's a better word, actually.
I think you need the word resources, because that provides the room for all those things.
Yeah, I'm not saying take them away. I'm saying let's add in
Yeah.
architecture and neighborhoods.
We can
Yeah,
define
additional
that.
goal. And
You
it-
can
I'm
even
talking
have
about
it, including but not limited to,
Right.
Right.
So the
buildings,
key
landscapes,
items.
neighborhoods,
But
you
there's
know.
also sites like the town wharf, like Burrs Hill, like the Hugh Hole Well.
Yeah, I mean, sites as well.
Word fabric has been used, fabric, historic fabric.
I mean, I've always liked sense of place. I mean, I worked on years ago with John Chafee. You know, that was that concept, and it's really stays with you. It's evocative. You know, to me, that is what a historic and cultural resource is, and it also fits into other areas too, land use, you know, and that, but we have a unique sense of place here, and that we tried to put into the narrative, but if we could move that up, that might be good too.
Okay.
I want to say too that, I don't know to what degree the existing comp plan language has been reviewed to see, I think I said in my email, you know, what's still applicable versus what's has not been accomplished, stuff that might be out of date, et cetera. Because it was a well-written plan, there is a lot of good language in that, in the existing current plan, which most of it goes back to 92. And so I think we need to do a thorough job of reviewing this and going through it to see what of it needs to be brought forward and included in this plan.
Sure. I just, you know, again, what we want to do is place it within the context of the structure. I mean, you know, we're not limited to the number of policies that we can put on here. At the same time, we want them to be powerful. So it's, you know, there is a balancing act here between,
And realistic.
yeah. Do we have that other one?
I like this one. so
Um,
stealing other people's
no,
words
let me-
now.
This, yeah.
Foster economic
We got them all out. Yeah,
vitality
Haley has
through
copies as
preservation of
well.
Properties which contribute to the historic character of the community. I don't know why Google good goals, but. But I like that.
Where's
Well,
that?
Sorry, Ashley, I just
forward-
missed what you
I
were
think
saying.
it's opengovernment.com. So it says like foster economic vitality through preservation of properties which contribute to the historic character of the community. Because it's true, like that is, it does drive economic, like people come to town because they do preserve the economic character and sightseeing, which then you're not just coming to the house, you're gonna eat at restaurants, so it doesn't do that. Another one of those says to identify, preserve, and protect significant historic properties and architectural, archaeological sites.
I just want to say what,
Can you,
I'll send it to you.
yeah, send it to Allison as well. Davison?
she's passing out on the draft that you guys are looking at. And one set is. I had talked about-
Get other plans.
And the other side was Sarah's.
And the other side, the other set was that Sarah had marked up, it was just, they were independent, we didn't work together on them.
Oh, that's okay.
But,
You're allowed to cheat on this test. You were allowed to cheat, you know, you could look at each
Oh,
other's
yeah.
paper, right?
um, But,
Well, again,
Big
I,
comment
you know, we didn't have a chance because we got these at 12, so we didn't have a chance to
no,
look
I
at them.
understand that, my big comment is that all of the comments that she and I have included are reacting to this draft,
Yeah,
so they're not.
Oh, right, your own additional commentary.
It's sort of like, you know, macro holistic approach to drafting the comp plan. These are just responses to what this draft is.
well, again, I mean, I think that, you know, may require another iteration, you know, of this.
So there's both sort of macro and micro.
Well, let's go through the policies and, you know, well, we have this in front of us, but let's, you know, take the first one, HC1, reduce development pressure on historic town from new construction that may be out of scale and character with the neighborhood.
So again, this goes back to, you know, I don't even know if this policy is pertinent. Because honestly, I don't see any correlation between what goes on in Patacon and the historical.
Well, let me play devil's advocate here. The concept was that by creating that special zoning district, you were going to encourage development away from the historic district. So that was the logic behind it. However,
Reduce pressure.
Yeah, however, I agree. I mean, I think if your policy is to reduce development pressure on historic downtown from new construction that may be out of scale with the character of the neighborhood, you have to identify a number of other places where such development would make sense. Now, the good news is Andrea Giles, who was a member of the planning board for a period of time, did go out and take a look at a number of the areas in Warren and identified places that she thought could conceivably be used for the kind of comprehensive permit I hate that thing, but that kind of more dense development. So instead of limiting it to Metacom, what the implementation action could be would be to identify those areas of town that are best suited to development. And among which the Metacom Avenue project would be one.
Be an example.
Yeah.
Could serve as an example.
But I don't think, we should be shying away from development in the historic district. I mean, and we just did Tourist as one example. Obviously, I don't think anybody likes how the second building came out, but nonetheless, I think there's still a place for development within this district, as long as it's in scale and so forth. So we don't want to shy development away. I mean, we've got Liberty Street School on the books or, in the pipeline or, you know what I mean? Like,
Empty lots.
yeah, I think, infill is a great thing in historic district. And so it's like, it's not that we want to shy new development.
Yeah, no,
away from
I hear
that.
you.
It just has to be in keeping.
Well, I think that the statement is reduce development pressure on historic downtown from new construction that may be out of scale and character with the neighborhood. So I think if
Right.
that's the policy statement, we're not eliminating development, we're qualifying.
We're filtering out the
Just
more
wouldn't
generic
work.
stuff.
And
Yeah.
I don't even know if you want to put that anywhere. When you word it like that, where do you want to put something that's out of scale and out of character? You know what I mean?
Well, again, that can fit into, I mean, this is one of the things that I was working on earlier today with the housing element, quite apart from this, is there are a number of areas, hey, my neighborhood, for example, where, you've got a lot of people coming in with a huge amount of money who are saying, I want to build a Malibu-sized mansion because I own the land. So this to me is a shot across the bow, but it has value in other parts of the town as well. And I mean, not just my neighborhood, but neighborhoods throughout the town that have a particular character. I mean, this is a really nice, walkable, neighborhood-friendly community. Yeah.
I was gonna add that one of the things that I really liked about Warren when I first came here is it has different areas that are sort of serve different purposes. And like when you go to a community like Barrington, it's just sort of endless suburbs. And, they have tried really hard to do some of their commercial development, but it all kind of feels the same. Whereas, you go out to Twisted and actually that has been changing in such a good way. But it had like a lot of beautiful open space, a little more farm feel. One of the most beautiful historic farms in America that is down on. Just things that were so unusual, like I would be like, ooh, I want to live in town, I want to live out there. Like, because it's so beautiful. But I don't know that we're really, as a town, really looking at these aspects and saying, come on, get on board and like.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that the scale and character, to speak to Davison's concern, it needs to appear in a variety of elements. Because we also have to change the zoning. I mean, a 35-foot high building as a right makes no sense. I mean, it's that concept, and actually Allison has gotten some very good information for us from Block Island, where nowadays, if you build a house, there's one particularly egregious example on the Kickapoo today that's going up. You put up a 7-foot foundation, your 35 feet begins from the top of the 30 of the foundation. So there's a thing up there that looks like a Days Inn that's going in on the Kickapoo, and that meets the zoning. Now, it's completely out of scale and character to that neighborhood. And if allowed to continue, it would wall off, you know, the views, the scenic viewscapes at the very least.
All right, well, if it were me, I would reword this policy, which would be to prohibit development of new construction that is out of scale and character of the neighborhood, no matter where it
You
is.
take the maybe, take that out, because that's getting back to what you were saying, it's not.
Because
it's-
What may be in scale and character on Metacom Ave may not be in scale and character with it, may not be in character and scale with the farmland, may not be in character and scale with the historic district. So I think scale and character is different all over town,
Yeah.
as Eileen said. And so it's just, you don't want development that goes out of that anyway.
Right.
And so it should be literally prohibit development that is out of scale and character with the neighborhood.
Yeah, good point, Ashley. I was just thinking, I was just pulling up land use because I'm wondering if there's language in there in
This-
land use that speaks to that. I think
Yeah, that's
because
more
this is the
like-
historic element, there was this focus on the historic district where that seems to be
Right. I'm making it
Um, a little more broad if we're talking about certain areas of town. I know Twisted obviously
Yes.
also is historic, but and just to explain this a little bit. The original focus, like the backbone of this comp plan update was the concept had been about focusing on the market to Metacom plan and all the elements woven into that throughout. So I think the historic element was kind of the biggest stretch as far as the market to Metacom tying that in. Compared to the other elements, it might be more obvious versus, so this policy,
And so maybe.
is an attempt to try to say how market to Metacom could have a benefit on the historic resources of the town. So I agree, maybe it's more of a stretch, the market to Metacom tie-in for historic, and so that policy is,
Yeah, so we can't say historic as like all of the town, just you can't blanket that. So you have to look at the historic district, and then you have to look at outlying properties that you would want to consider as historic. Or that have been named historic. And so that's one of the things that you can't just say like all town, everything within the town has to be historic. 'Cause
No,
that-
that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah, so we have to like focus on the historic district in the language there, and then if there are any outlying properties, identifying those properties that don't fit, naming them as historic and ensuring that they're preserved under historic. I know the one thing that we did add to this plan that was never in the other plan is HCB 4B, which establishes guidelines for historic property owners on preservation sense mitigation options. Oh, this is not what I was looking for. I thought it was something else. We did talk about people having the option to register their house,
Opt in.
opt into historic preservation of their property. So for that barn, for example, if you own that barn, you could opt in as a historic property. Many other cities across the country do that. You have the downtown historic, which blankets, but then if there are properties, say in East Warren that are historic, that property owner could opt in so that then it's perpetual and whoever buys that home has to abide to the historic standards, just like in the historic district.
so yeah, that's an HC2A.
And thought we put it in
Yep,
somewhere.
allow for opting into historic district from outside the boundaries of the historic district. So if there's a historic property.
But that doesn't limit to respecting any historic building, whether it's been designated by an owner or not, it does, like, I think to your point is that, for instance, Twislet Point, that's historically, there's elements to that are not under any register, and they should be treated as historic buildings, not from a.
I don't think spots on
You
that.
can't do that.
No, what I'm saying though is that if you have this is a comprehensive plan. So if the comprehensive plan is having language saying that you respect the historic integrity,
Exactly.
then the value of your historic building can be brought up. You can reference the historic, that, the reason that you're doing this is it's consistent with the historic integrity of the community, blah, 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 blah,
Yeah.
So in that, you might benefit from having some of the broad language that Davidson's referencing, but not necessarily, like, I still think that having, being very specific about the historic downtown area, because that is a designated area, is also important, because I think that, as the chairman was pointing out, having an alternative, almost like a filter that, like, a way for those other developments to go, being like Medicom, is important, but I wouldn't want to,
I think I'd like to talk about is it's at least 100-years-old thing. Well, 100 years old today might have some historic properties. I really don't want to preserve some of the in 20 years what some of these properties within a historic district are going to look like. I mean, they weren't exactly adding to the nature of the town. If you know what I mean, some of the buildings that were built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and at one point, it someday will be 100 years old.
Yeah, that's.
Do you want to preserve
that's
that?
a National number. Warren didn't make up that number.
yeah, it's like a,
That's the sort of standard that the nation uses. Certainly you can argue, at what point is that, are we gonna be,
Mid-century.
mid-century is already getting some interesting play around the
Right,
country. Like it or lump it, it's interesting, but yeah, once we get into like certainly seventies, whatever, the crap that we're building in the eighties, at some point, is that gonna look historic or be historic? We're gonna be fighting to save that, like,
But that depends on your perspective.
Yeah.
Maybe in 100 years, yes, it's the same.
right, exactly.
I mean, obviously, one of the things that we ran into was people doing away with buildings that we all find to be historically charming, because at that point in time, it wasn't a big issue to them,
Right.
so, but at some time it might be,
Well, again, I think the concept, there's a larger issue of neighborhood character and sense of place that changes depending on where you are. On this first one, we're talking about the historic downtown. There are obviously other areas in town that have, historic architecture or landscape as well. But we did want to, there is something, I think it deserves a focus because of the extent of it, the efforts that have gone in to protect it already. I mean, it's a dense historic district. There are certainly broken teeth in the mouth.
This may be the place where, because some of you may have already heard some of these discussions as a result of the 119 proposal, was when the new building came up. I think Ashley was the one who made the point that, we don't have a lot of guidelines for new construction in the historic district. And the National Trust has a whole program on specifically that, how to build something within a historic district, not to necessarily copy something. And we heard some of that with Liberty Street School, but to have it so that it's in scale and it sort of fits within the context of the neighborhood. And so maybe this is the place to put that, is to say.
As an implementation
As an
action,
implementation action, to say, implement.
the National Trust standards for,
substantial
Yeah.
new construction.
sure,
Within historic districts.
yeah.
Because then it would reflect the policy that you're trying to
I
put
agree.
there.
Yeah, no,
I think that's the best way to do
that
it.
works.
And then you could link it in like the appendage, because then I'm sure they update their standards. And that's a good way to do it.
The, where you had said prohibit, it was that may be out of scale, that that is, so we can simply, you know,
Okay,
that,
so
that
we
I
will
think,
prohibit development that is out of scale and character with historic neighborhoods.
that is out of scale and character
That's
with,
somewhat clearer and more
yeah,
direct.
yeah,
Oh, right.
definitely, cool. And then
And
as
then-
an implementation action, I think HC1A, that permit residential land use at a higher density within Metacom project can drop down. It may be I don't want to get rid of it. I don't, you know, I think there was a lot of thought and good thought that went into it, but I think we need.
That should be in another section, like in the housing section or in the.
Well,
Yeah,
it
it
is-
is in other elements,
Yeah.
so it's just a matter of, I mean, so it doesn't need to be in this element, it's just in trying to, in that,
Point,
that
yeah.
concept that of what the direction was last year, trying to get market to
Yeah,
Medicom
that's-
in each one, but I agree it doesn't, with the policy language changing, this doesn't seem applicable
because
anymore
implementing-
for that.
Implementing
be-
that doesn't achieve the policy.
Right, so
Right.
that, it's something has to change there, but I can
So
move
add
things
what you
around,
said
that's
in
fine.
its
Yeah,
place.
we'll go back, and so
Yeah,
we'll be dealing more.
instead
with
of HC2B as it is, you could put the language about the standards.
Okay, great. Well, now I see create or increase incentives to restore buildings.
Yeah, I mean, that just,
I'm not sure that would, that's another policy, I think.
maybe that's a whole policy. I just wanted to.
Yeah, no, I hear you. It was just that it was next door to the other one. So HC2, protect and preserve historic and cultural resources through the use of design standards, zoning regulations, and other strategies. And this is, I can tell you, one of the key elements of the comp and of what we want. I mean, we have to change zoning. You know, I've had a number of experiences with the zoning board where they said, that's not my job. And that's because the zoning isn't, the language isn't, they're very strict constructionalists right now on the zoning board. So I want to make sure that they've got the language that they have to follow, because they generally are pretty good if the language is there, but if the language is not there, or there's any degree of vague, you know, language, they're not going to necessarily fall in the way you'd like. I'm sorry, well,
Is it strong?
That's what you're saying, that it's not.
I mean, I think,
Yes.
you know, use of stringent zoning regulations, or, you know, aimed at protecting and preserving historic resources. We've defined historic resources in that broader sense, so we could use that as a. Does that make sense?
Then how do you define stringent zoning restrictions or stringent?
Yeah, I mean, that-
Yeah.
Well, I'm not saying stringent may not be the right word. Well, it's through the use of design standards and zoning regulations to preserve and protect.
Yeah.
Historic resources.
Yeah, I think by putting in that very specifically, this is what we're going to follow. And whether it's following the national standards or Warren developing their own standards. They're very. And so that's what Bristol has. If you live within the historic district, they tell you what house, and I mean, that's the other thing you do have to consider when you do this, though. You know, that means your houses are gonna be certain colors, your doors are gonna be certain colors, you know what I mean?
But
No
that's,
additions, things like that.
that would be
you
a-
put in there.
No.
If you want them to be very,
Yeah.
Well, but I mean, that what you're saying would be a law that the town passes as opposed to their comprehensive plan, right?
yeah. But
Because
I mean,
I think
when
that,
you're
you know.
looking at it, you're putting
Yeah, so
in,
this
and that's
is-
how you preserve
this is
historic
different.
preservation by being very.
But then in the implementation actions, you would list some of the specific things you wanted to do to protect and preserve historic and cultural resources.
You're not supposed to put it in the right implementation.
Right.
So are there certain I mean, yeah, you don't need to get into writing zoning, that.
Right,
That
exactly.
is a
That's what I was trying
separate,
to-
that's the
right.
next process, so the plan is adopted and then you implement the plan by crafting specific zoning language, but I mean, if there are other, if there is more specific guidance, I know there was discussion about the demolition ordinance, some amendments, maybe being desired for that. I don't think we've listed that yet in here, but it talks about updating the historic district ordinance, a stone wall ordinance, like, are there other specific,
Well, that is. a zoning
Policies that-
regulation. I mean, the demolition, you know, I mean, I'd like zoning regulations to stay in there. I'd like to have it, you know, more specific. It's, you know, adapt zoning regulations, adapt or adopt, you know, to, so that you're pointing out the fact that you got to do something. You know, you're gonna have to change. It's not, we're not just gonna go with the existing zoning regulations. We're gonna need to change those.
Yeah, it does.
I mean, you know, again, when you go back to the state guidelines, you know. They couldn't be more direct. Preserve historic buildings, districts, and archaeological sites. Like, I just love direct language like that because that's for us to follow. That's how we need.
And then do the design standards, the zoning regulations and the implementation actions?
Yeah, because you're gonna have to, because
Sure.
you know what this, you know,
How
you have
about
to say what that means for each person, because it's open for
isn't that a
interpretation.
goal, what you just read off?
That was in the state, goals and policies in the historic section.
Then you.
What document are you looking at, the state guide plan? Okay, so
Section 4.
that's a goal of the state guide plan.
This is, yes. How they listed here. Yes.
So-
List of goals, objectives, and policies.
The goal, could you read it again?
Preserve historic buildings, districts, and archaeological sites. And that is in the state land use policy.
Yeah, we've got that in HC4. Oh, no, I see there's from the effects of climate
Right,
change.
I
exactly.
know, I keep doing that too. It's somewhere in here though.
That, you know,
I think it's
there's
each,
probably other resources as well as buildings and districts. As we've already talked about different sites and so forth, but. That's in the land use 2025 document around state land use policy and plan.
Yeah.
So-
saying you don't like the language of HC2.
No, I'm not. I think it's very direct. I think it's very clear.
I think what we need is the implementation actions to
Back
become,
that up.
Yes.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
You know, I'm gonna say something that's gonna be really controversial, and that is that I wish the town had some design standards for places like the cargo container proposal at first. For, you know, standards for fencing, situations like maybe fencing needs to be put up around the cemetery or something. The town wharf, the lighting at the town wharf. You know, I think that the town, if this is gonna be imposed on individuals, the town should impose it on themselves.
There is a thing, I think it says, correct me if I'm wrong, the town is exempt from zoning.
yes. Yes, we are there. But
No, I seriously, I somebody just asked me one day about the addition that we put on the Joyce Street School for that little bump out. That faces the bike path, what's it, where they bring in prisoners or something, it's like a one stall car garage.
Yeah.
And I had somebody literally flipping out at me one day that, how do you approve this, that, look at that historic building, you put this piece of crap up there, blah, blah, blah. I'm like. Town's exempt from zoning, don't look at me. We have no say in it whatsoever. So it's an interesting dialogue, anyway, I don't know how it works, like, out of town, if that's just generic.
No, it doesn't, not every town is exempt. I can say the opposite that I've seen where a municipality wants to put a solar array on a school. They have to hop through every step, wait every month, every weapon stage.
That's
So
Squawk
it's-
Island.
And there's another ones, yeah, but that's the other
They
side.
don't have-
That's the other side of the half, trying to set around individual, you know, the bigger projects, et cetera, so there's.
well, I think your point though is, could that fit into one of the implementation? Because this building, for example, is a historic building. So, you know, if the town is given free rein from zoning, you know, that's not protecting things. So to me, an implementation action to address your issue, Sarah, is to say, to bring the municipality and all of its holdings or structures. I'm sorry, well,
Yeah, holdings, entities.
you know, within the town's zoning regulations.
I don't know if I support changing the zoning exemption. You know, a policy that would encourage, you know, doing that. You know, that's a political issue, I think. I mean, you can vote people out if they do that. I mean, take for example, you know, the parking lot up on, you know, that abuts tourists, or, you know, we've got to do something with that. And there's some plans in the works. But I mean, imagine if the town had to go through every single hoop to try to, you know, do something proper with that. There's a historic building that sits on it. You know, it jams up a lot of stuff, so I think that needs more.
I mean, I think that,
That was negatives, really.
Yes.
I mean, I would think that the only way that would make sense to do anything like that, it would be if there was some like, you know, unique streamlined approach for that would go before town council on certain
Yeah.
matters over a certain size or some scope or something like that. To
Well,
where
it
at least be
require
heard.
a certain amount of
But,
guidance. I
yeah,
mean, I
the whole
think the
process.
two situations, I see what you're saying, Brad. I mean, I understand that. I think, you know, one extreme or the other doesn't necessarily solve the problem, but the idea that somebody can, in the town can just move ahead. I mean, we've had some situations with fields where one of the department heads was clearing a field for, you know, sports fields without any discussion at all.
Maybe like an advisory opinion from the soil commission for any spouse.
Yeah.
Something like that.
So-
I mean, you know,
So I wonder.
holiday.
Talk about the type of review, that's a little bit like what we do.
Yeah.
On the historic, you know, we look at things and we look at context, like that's our charge.
Right, so we're saying do that with for the municipality as well.
I wonder if, like, so it says apply for additional national registry listings for eligible historic properties. So say if you applied for this building, then none of us get to decide. The National Historic is gonna say to the town, this is what you can't do that. Right, so I think if you I think that's kind of maybe a workaround where you're not just blanketing something that could change.
The historic, well, the National Register doesn't control like private property. It's really just a designation. It's not,
Yeah.
it's not like a local historic district that, you know,
Well, let's say you
can demolish something in a National Register.
Well, the town owns that now. What if the town just went in there with a bulldozer one day and started tearing that building down? We have nothing to say about that. That's not included in the demolition. So that's a very prominent historic building. It really needs to be-
Well, that's why I think some kind of guidance to see, at least it comes out into the public as opposed to,
Right.
you know, the thing gets knocked down in the night. You know, not literally, but, you know,
And there's some kind of a review,
yeah,
some
Right.
semblance of review.
And it should include sites too, like Burris Hill,
Yeah, I
not
think
just
that would have
buildings.
turned out a lot better if we had maybe, you know, the planner had given us the plan and said, what do you think about this? And, you know, and then we would have went home and all said, let's see what we can come up with and come back and have maybe some more ideas. I just think, you know, one person just says, hey, we're gonna get this, you know, trailer here for back from work, you know. like,
no, I
mean,
hear you. I mean, well, and I think so I think that we're in agreement that a review, and does that work, Brent? I mean, I think
just
we're
look at
not putting a prohibition on it. We're not putting them through the whole regulatory process, but we are at least saying this deserves some discussion, you know.
Just
Yeah,
because,
some sort of a review is fine, that there's public input is fine.
right, that's-
Binding, you know, input is something I have trouble with.
Yeah, no, so we're not asking. I think that a review is not a binding decision. I mean,
I do think that there's things involved sometimes that you don't know about.
right.
And so you have to consider those shortcomings of a site or, you know, but the problem is we were given a lot of, I think, false information about Burris Hill and, it just got dragged out and money had to be spent and, you know, then you're making decisions under pressure.
And I think some things it comes down to the cost of something, and then we do have to consider like the HC4 things that this is a sea level rise, high risk flood zone. And so I know while the trailer is not very pretty, it floats and we're not gonna contaminate. Well,
No.
like whatever they had to do is not gonna contaminate the
But
river and our
the
drinking
problem
water.
was is that it
States.
created a tremendous amount of contention and it ultimately cost everybody a lot more money than it would have had there been a more open process. Right.
Again,
Right, and so a review, if you know that there's gonna be a review, it's not like who's slipping it under the door. And you know, it's probably gonna be like an hour or so. I mean, particularly if you can get the information out to people.
So, one of the big pushbacks on Burris Hill, I don't want to get bogged down in Burris Hill, but was the neighborhood said, you know, you blindsided us, we had no idea.
Right.
You know, there was no, so we used Warren Connect, right, to push that information out and say, you know, here's a proposal in your neighborhood, but I'm kind of saying, this is the idea of some kind of a review that would keep us from being accused of doing something in the middle of the night and not informing.
Okay, well,
If
let's,
we're all in agreement.
yeah, so let's put that in, a review of, you know,
And that could include demolition.
well, I wanna, that's a separate issue, this is one.
And that would already involve review, correct? I mean, if the
Yes.
town building's gonna be.
Yeah, you
demolished,
have
right?
to, you have a zoning, and the town council actually is the body that's supposed to make the decision on demolition, except for in the case of the comprehensive permit.
Or no, I
there-
was thinking,
I'm talking about town property.
what
You know, I
is,
take the little.
they're exempt from that.
information booth That was there at Dulles.
Oh,
If the town had decided to demolish that, that would have been really bad.
well, if it was being used for some functional purpose, but it's been sitting there doing nothing
But
for.
it's kind of an example of what could be a town asset that's demolished.
Yeah, you know, again, I want to be careful here that, you know, we're not hamstringing people because, you know, I mean, I talked 4 planning directors ago about putting signage on the bike path there, showing what stores and restaurants were up in there. And
Wait,
that sucker has languished for over a decade now. So, you know, there's a balance between what needs to be preserved and what's functional, you know, what is actually doing what it was set out to do. So I think that municipal
I
review
think,
is,
yeah, I
part of it.
understand.
and then I think,
I'll try
what
to take a
but
crack
this
at
is-
drafting what you're.
and then the other elements, I don't know about form-based code in the historic district. Does that make any sense?
If that language is in there, I was looking at that as well. I mean, I don't know that it is problematic, but it is problematic to me if you don't have those strict historic laws in place.
I agree.
Like, I think that you have to, so we specify form-based code, but we don't specify those laws. So it's like, you're almost like, you know,
need design
I
guidelines.
just think that the town would have to have some like really, you know, design or some sort of historic or
That
preservation.
would go back to
place.
HC1A, which would be creating codes for new construction in a historic district.
And I think.
Right, so we don't, so we could take that out.
So H2B, I don't even think. Would just be a one.
Yeah.
Originally, what the reason that is
Or-
in there was that we were trying to, you know, emphasize the need for form-based code on Medicom, so including it in language
That's fine.
throughout the documents, you know,
This isn't-
right, I agree.
So we take that out, Allison, or no?
Thinking about it, it would be,
Decisions.
yeah.
No, and well, that's, you know, I want to know the, you know, what the objections are. I mean, hopefully we'll get through most of the policies, but maybe we won't. You know, these are key. these first ones, because they're at the top and it's, you know, this is where,
Unless you were saying like form-based code subject to historic.
Well, that's what it
language, you
says
know.
here, as a complement to historic district regulations. So you're not scratching your historic district regulations.
But the problem
controls
is-
there, but form-based code, the concept, you know, it's not something that is utilized, much locally, but you know, focusing on the form, which is really, you know, versus the actual use inside the building. So I feel like it could be applicable
Right.
if written correctly within a historic district. You
okay,
know, you do see a lot of applications coming in that, you know, just changing the use. They're not even changing any of the physical characteristics of the building, but, you know, they have to go through multiple town meetings for that, and it might alleviate some of that. But it just, again, depends on how it's
Okay.
written, but
HC2C, I don't see that as a deal breaker, frankly. I mean, because I think it says following implementation of form-based code for the Minicom project area. Consider, you know, in that case, I think that the less than strident language might be okay. It is okay, you know.
I know there is some pushback out there. I won't mention names,
For,
but stone walls.
the encourage the preservation of historic stone walls. I mean, that seems, you know, how about all of the other landscape elements?
Yeah, I think I think that might be too specific, so maybe if you said for, you know, historic landscapes and their features or something like that.
And sites,
what else would it be?
That's kind of it.
well, I mean,
I'm for it, believe me, I'm.
yeah, I mean, I don't see a problem with adopt local to encourage the preservation. It's not saying you have to, it's saying,
Well, so regulation, see, this is, goes back to my earlier comment about weak language.
Right.
If you adopt a regulation, well, then you're not encourage it. It's a
Yeah.
regulation,
Yeah.
you know, so.
But in cases, like there's local examples of stonewall ordinances in communities that, yeah, there's an ordinance, so there can be exceptions, right? Like in cases of needing access. So, okay, you can remove 15 feet of that stone wall, but you need to reconstruct it somewhere else on the property. So there's a regulation, but it doesn't mean they're on exemptions for.
I don't have a
certain
problem with
cases.
this, the regulations of
And
stone
it
walls.
could-
I'm just, should we put some other stuff in there? That's all I was thinking. It seems awfully limited, you
But like,
know?
what's historic landscape?
Well, like, you've got Burrs Hill, you've got,
But that's like,
farms.
but the farms aren't considered within the, so
Yeah,
those are
that's-
private property and they're not considered.
No,
within the
but some of them,
historic district.
some of them, the development rights have been sold. So that's a,
How do you know if it's historic?
what?
Right, that's what I mean, like, if it's outside the historic district, we can't blanket the whole town as a historic district, it will be like the
Because
end
it's
of Warren.
Close to original, foliage or whatever as it was, you know, when we got here. Or else because of a historic event that happened there, like, Windmill Hill, that's a historic event. Also, there's conservation land that's historic.
Yeah, I think that might be more suited to the land use, though. I think if we start you know, I mean, I'm not, it has a place in the comprehensive plan. I just don't know whether we want to,
Natural resources element is a lot of the, you know, landscape, we talk about scenic landscapes and open space protection, getting into.
should
that-
the
that
stone
element.
walls go there too?
No, because Stonewalls, that's a pretty common thing in Rhode Island and in New England to have the historic walls preserved.
So we're to adopt local regulations to preserve historic stone walls, take out the encourage.
That's pretty much it,
Okay,
And in some cases, the ordinance is written for the stone walls that are within the public view, like within along roadways, like maybe not internal to like the rear of someone's private property. So, you know, the community can craft the language,
okay.
how, you know, you see fit, but.
So can I back up a second? So this HC2, I think we all agree it's a really good policy generally. And one of the things that we run into, the way the historic district is governed right now is an evolution of 3 different ordinances essentially. And I know the solicitors have had concerns about this because it's not really clear. There's probably problematic language in there that makes the town vulnerable. And so we have the voluntary historic district committee, which was adopted 30+ years ago, which was essentially that you could get a tax credit if you did certain things, followed certain guidelines with your property, with your building. Then 20 years ago or so, we had the Walgreens battle where we adopted the demolition ordinance afterwards, which prohibited demolition of historic buildings within the downtown historic district. And then about 10 years ago, that ordinance got expanded after the developers wanted to remove the front portico at St. Mark's Church to include essentially all exterior features of a historic building. And so that is how we are operating now and have been for the past 10 years or so. And on the ground, it's functioning as, for all intents and purposes, a genuine historic district. Every proposed change to the exterior of a historic building comes before the commission for review and approval or denial or compromise or whatever. And so I know that it's a hybrid, it's unique probably in the whole country, literally. I've heard from the solicitors that if there was a way to
Consolidate
all that, and streamline all that, and make it clear and more concise, that it would benefit everybody.
Action 1,
Property
remove
owners are still
voluntary.
confused because the term voluntary is still attached to it, even though
It's
a
not.
chunk of it is not now.
So what would you, I get what you're saying. The suggestion is to consolidate and
Simplify.
the current protected ordinances
That's our recommendation.
into historic district protection ordinance, protection and preservation.
Yeah.
Remove
Well,
voluntary.
I
Action
thought
item
we'd
number
already
one,
moved-
remove voluntary
It's
and
more than just
update,
name.
No, it's.
no,
it's-
update the policies.
Consolidating all, because you have
Yes.
3 separate components of this thing that we're working under. And it's.
No, it
You
makes
could
sense
just
for
establish a
anybody.
mandatory policy.
Yeah, it's
confusing for
mandatory.
Property owners, it's confusing for architects, builders, realtors.
So a mandatory historic protection and preservation policy.
Theoretically, I mean,
Yeah.
that's what we're operating
All
under.
right, well, let's, yeah.
Yeah.
so
Establish, yeah.
But
let's
that's
have that as a,
Action item 1. Because that's what the problems are coming in. Action item 1, like that's the first thing that needs to be done. And again, if we put it as an action item, then the town council has to, I think, probably change these things and the policy has to be made, but I agree. I think it needs to be, if we're gonna do it, you gotta do it right.
And I don't need to speak for the solicitor, they will definitely want to draft it so that
Right.
it is legal and clear and all of that. But that's my own take on it, being on the commission itself and
Yeah.
having to manage these different components of it and try to explain to applicants all the time that, they learn, they order materials, they order windows, they order stuff that's like, oh, and then I found out I have to do this and that, and it's like, it's at the very least, a public relations hassle for the town. Kind of gives the town a black eye. And, we're generally good about working with applicants and working through them. But it's nice if they're already coming in and they're already prepared, they already know what they're up against.
now does zoning get involved with that?
Who?
Zoning?
No.
It's
Oh, you
that,
mean in drafting it? Oh, yeah.
no, I mean in terms of the implementation right now.
No.
Okay. Good. All right, so it's a consolidation of. Now you're seeing that as the policy or as the
Well, I think
implementation?
that's an action item that would back
Okay.
up HC two, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you would put, remove voluntary and implement policies. They consolidate. in stream, you know what I mean, whatever language.
That's cool.
Yeah, no, that's, yes, that would be an action item.
Just get rid of volunteer and make sure that all the current ordinances, programs reflect that it's not a voluntary commission on district. And I think they can still facilitate the tax incentive program of all intents and purposes, say the commissions that planning, such as zoning, we have key to back up ordinance, put in the operation and motion.
Yeah, because
Okay.
then like as people buy homes and things, they see this, they get this in writing that in purchasing this home, here's what you agree to abide by.
I mean, to me, that would be HC 2A. Right?
Or 1A,
No, because you're HC 2.
or 2A, yeah, 2A, you're right.
So the HC 2A, that one. Because what we're doing, I mean, opting in from outside the boundaries doesn't, isn't an immediate benefit to the policy.
How do you do that? What does that? How do you opt in? From silence?
Yeah, so that would have to be like another process, like you would have to.
So I
you'd have
think
to-
one way now is the incentive program, with the combo taxes,
Mhm.
meaning property that they certain criteria, to be technically viewed by the town as a sort of property, because they can advantage of the tax, then therefore any exterior operation has to comply, et cetera.
Even if you're outside the town?
Yeah, there is criteria for it,
Yeah.
within that particular program incentive.
Yeah, and then I think though, like, the town would have to come up with some type of registry for that. And then the goal then is like, if you sell that house, again, you get that certificate that says like you're purchasing, even though you're not in the downtown historic district. You're going to abide by this. I think I know Pittsburgh does that. If you're not within certain areas, you can opt in and they will come and determine if you have a historic
Rhode
property.
Island just, sent out, an email that they had started a program, for any historic properties that want to opt in, and they'll oversee them.
Yes.
Once a year, they'll go out and do the inspection, make sure,
They get state information of property.
Oh,
Okay.
Is it like an easement, on the
Yeah.
property? I see, yeah. So, property owner that's really passionate about
Mhm.
their historic property and not wanting future owners to, do anything to alter the historic character can put an easement, a historic
Okay, I
easement
just
in
think
their
we dropped
property to
that down a
protect
bit.
it. So that would be a private property owner's decision. But the opting into the local historic district, the actual boundary on the map could change, you'd have your core historic district, but then there might be a parcel in Towissa that's then drawn onto your map because yeah. Mhm.
So, even just dawning on me now that looking at this, we should reverse HC2 and HC1, because HC2 really is the primary policy for the second, right?
Yep, I agree. Because we're reducing development pressure. The reason that came on first was because it was fitting within the Medicom thing. So yeah, I agree. I think if we make
That's that.
Flip, yeah.
HC
Switch,
two
put
becomes
HC
HC1.
two as the first policy.
That really is the primary goal. of policy.
Yep. Moving along to HC3. We good? Chad? Again, we're gonna get another crack at this,
Oh,
but
yeah.
promote the values and benefits of historic preservation, cultural tourism, and civic pride.
So just the goals that were added based on the state comment, you need to have policies that help you achieve your goals. So this policy is one of those attempting to address the state's comments.
Yeah, I think it's the easy one, just leave it. I think it's an easy one, just leave it. You don't want to get too, like, we don't want to like commit to like certain requirements around it, but I think people are doing this anyways, and the town should then just support it.
Do we have any problems with those implementation actions as written?
So who is actually gonna do the application? The town planner?
For the National Registry. I think it would have to be the property owner unless it's a town asset.
I don't
So
know.
then it's gonna be
I mean, you know.
support of applications. Or encourage, like, but that's really about all you can do then is, you know. Help somehow.
These are for private properties.
Could be,
Well, it could be town, I mean, it could be
could be the Baptist church.
any
So it could be for any.
eligible, you know, if,
But that's determined by the National Register, not by the town.
Right.
So,
And as you'll see on the second one there, 3B. Roger Williams did the most comprehensive survey of the historic resources in town 10 years ago. And, you know, those resources don't really change. So, you know, this town is famous for doing studies that we put on the shelf.
yeah, well, that would be an appendix. You
I
know,
think it's, yeah, I think it's worthy of it.
Sure.
Oh, so the HC4, is that, I think this is more like, this is a risk assessment for are any of the properties gonna get washed away?
No, he's talking about.
No, we're not there yet. We're-
3B. HC 3B.
So,
did that,
do you know where that study is?
did that study have, I wonder why this. I'm wondering, you know, I forget this was drafted over a year ago. So did that study, was it comprehensive in nature in that it included those, not just historic properties, but
Yeah, they mentioned
these, yeah, I don't know why that's specifically referenced in there, so.
I think it was our daily walk. Yeah,
I think they were talking about the problem.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so too.
I remember that it actually did cite this cobblestones.
Yeah,
Is
we
that
had
this-
So you feel like this action item has already been implemented and there's no need for an update, is that? Like-
Yeah, I don't think we need to undertake an
Yeah.
updated survey.
Like review it or
Or,
keep it in mind.
yeah,
Implement recommendations of the plan already.
there's literally 17 pages of recommendations in the back of that plan.
Yikes.
There's so many ideas. Those guys did an incredible job.
Right, but you want to be careful that we're not saying we're implementing 17 pages of stuff that
No, I'm just
is,
saying.
Could you review and give us like like, what are like the main points of it that we could add? Like, what would
No.
you would?
Yeah. No, I think what we want to do is, I think we
No, I
want
mean,
to,
just
I
like,
think we want to
next week or
include
so.
that. We're just saying undertaken, updated. We don't, those words we don't need
Right.
because there has been a comprehensive survey.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah,
embrace
What do we do with it?
or accept,
Yeah, embrace is
or,
a good word.
you know,
maybe,
right,
Yeah.
that's, change that word, you know,
Okay.
and I think
Utilize, I don't know.
because, you know, again, you're saying, well, how do you utilize it? But, you know, and I think,
Identify.
I just,
Acknowledging
you know,
the
it's like,
existence of-
it seems like a great thing and it's just, I don't want
Certainly could be appendix to
I
the.
wonder-
to, yeah, and we'll do as an appendix for sure.
Make it digital and put it online. so it's
Um,
visible.
Yeah,
I mean,
you know,
you could almost say identify and
Okay.
document.
It is
so that we would
linked
just-
to, yeah, it's listed in the reports and online resources with a link to it.
Great.
Consult, review. Consult. Or review or acknowledge
Yeah. no,
that it exists.
Yeah, well,
No,
acknowledge
it's
again,
not, it's not, the action is not to review some other
We're gonna
thing.
do
It's,
something
it's
with it.
actually to identify the properties, but that process has already taken place. So we could reference that identification process through referencing that document or creating a comprehensive document from that and other sources.
Identify actions related to the comprehensive survey.
So I think you probably want to put something, so while that was done 10 years ago, we're now 10 years older, so now there's from like 19 20 to.
Well, again, I think,
19
I think we're gonna have to,
1925, now we're gonna follow that plan. So
we're
you
gonna
might
have to
want
look at.
My house got it
You know,
over that period.
That's what I mean, like, so new, with that 100-year mark, there's new assets you should add.
You're telling us we have to use the national model of 100 years as a cutoff date. You know, what I mean, we could use an actual date. You know, for example, the Depression, 1929 was really the last, that was the end of decent architecture, You had the Depression, nothing happened. World War II, nothing happened. And then you had urban renewal where they started tearing it all down in the 40s and 50s and 60s. So we could literally use a date, a hard date, to say, well, nothing happened, this place would be considered historical instead of this slowly moving date that we're currently working with.
I agree with fixing the definition of historic to,
You know what I mean?
to whatever Warren's, current,
Yeah, the early
Yeah.
settlements and.
Warren's. int-
Let's be honest, there's some like mistakes made in the historic district that we would like to probably fix a little bit. that
From
we're-
1929, as you said, from 1929
Just-
back,
just
you know.
an idea.
I mean, I do.
I
like
wouldn't
that.
want to
If
limit.
there was any here, I wouldn't want to lose any Art Deco stuff from the 20s. Even into the 30s.
The
they did
30s, yeah, there was a lot of
stuff.
cool stuff in the 30s.
Yeah,
But so,
And brutalist architecture, who doesn't like that?
We don't tear down city walls. It's historic.
Yeah, really, God almighty. Okay, protect historic, so we're good with HC3, I think. HC4, protect historic buildings, areas and archaeological sites from the effects of climate change and natural disasters. This is important, particularly for Water Street, but also for other parts of the town. And this, I think, Bob did a deep dive on, so I'd leave it.
Yeah, I don't have any, as you can see, I didn't have any changes to it.
Yeah, no, I think this one, this was
See,
good. And to identify and seek options and resources. Yeah, I like that. In HC4B, coordinate with the RAH PHC to identify and seek options and resources to assist owners, because that suggests that, we're not just going to identify them, somebody's going to do some work.
Well, is that where you would want to talk about not allowing 35 feet of the?
No, it's really because that's a broader stroke. Yeah, and it's also, it would impact this area. Because in order to preserve those houses, one approach would be to raise them all up. And if you do that,
But if they're all going up, then it's not as big of a.
yeah, and also the size of the houses there, as we realized, there's not that many tall buildings in the historic district.
And I think what we thought is like, if it's destroy them because of flood damage or rise them up, we'd rather have them on stilts than not have them at all.
Yeah,
Right?
well, again, and I think, but I think that where it's going to be a problem are in some other parts of the town where you don't, you're not talking about saving buildings, you're talking about putting in,
New
somebody's palace, Okay, HC5. Okay, so this one is discourage the demolition of historic buildings and encourage their adaptive reuse. I see somebody has prohibit. I don't know that that seems a little strong to me, because if you've got a building that is not salvageable.
Well,
This does strike to the core of, what we were dealing with on one
Yeah,
nineteen.
I thought. Prohibit is
no,
probably not legal.
No, I think it actually kind of,
Yeah.
where it actually gives us the waivers that the council uses such as AG, et cetera.
How about, well, discourage, is that,
we already have an ordinance, so I don't know why this is really here.
Well, because I think
wanna keep
it's,
it in there.
I'd want to keep it in there because I think
Yeah,
it's,
emphasizing the.
yeah, I think this is important to have as a key point in,
Couldn't you use prioritize or promote
Yeah,
adaptive use and renovation rather than demolition?
I think that.
You're gonna get applications for demolition.
I like that.
You're gonna get applications for
Right.
demolition, so you
Yeah,
have to, you're gonna have to consider them and review them.
I promote adaptive reuse and renovation over the
prioritize.
demolition of historic buildings.
And that goes back to my earlier comment on the first page, that says, create incentives to preserve buildings and restore buildings. So that-
Well, it's adopt an adaptive reuse ordinance that encourages the reuse of it when original uses are no longer suitable or marketable. That's,
Yeah, I'm fine encouraging adaptation and, rehabilitation and reuse, et cetera, but this. Affirmative language is better, discourage the demolition is,
Right, it doesn't-
it just it hits me wrong.
Yeah,
I
that's
don't think
wrong.
the Town needs to be taking a position on,
yeah, well, that's why we're switching it
It's
to,
wrong.
I like the prioritize, because it shows that we, given two options, we're gonna prioritize this one, however, there is an understanding that things just.
So you think prioritize the adaptive reuse.
yeah,
Yeah.
and renovation. Yeah, I'm cool with that. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
Encourage the
the
use.
adopt an adaptive reuse ordinance, so then that kind of explains how we evaluate the prioritization.
That's the detail.
Yeah.
On the encourage, when you go for state or federal historic tax credits, you're doing that as a private citizen, right? You're doing that as so it's, I mean, well, in other words, it's not the town that's going to provide you with those credits. You've got to seek them out. I've got a building, I want to fix it up.
Well, we provided them.
But there are historic tax.
That you get through the town.
Yes, in the state and federal government.
Yeah, but you
Okay.
gotta apply for them.
You have to apply for each.
So, well, that's what I'm saying. So instead of encourage, is there a word that we would use to channel people in that direction?
Inform regarding.
I mean, here, promote.
Yeah, that's.
Promote.
I mean, because what you want to do is you don't, it's not a mystery. It's like, hey, you know what? Here's where you can go.
And we actually, we
Right.
changed our application, so we put it right at the top as a checkbox. So that people are aware. And it's one of the first things they answer when they apply for the historic commission.
So do we want to add the use of town, state, and federal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so promote the use of town, state, and federal historic tax credits.
Or do you want to say inform private property owners of available historic tax credits, available funding? Like that's the action that the town is
Yeah.
doing. is
Sure.
implementing.
Yeah, yeah, okay. No, that's
Something we
fine.
can do. We haven't talked about, we have a brochure that's 20 years old. We've been talking about redoing that so that, we could do a whole townwide mailing or at least.
Link on the website that has
Yes.
all the details and how to,
Yeah.
to connect.
Yeah, like that.
Yeah. Wow. Set up a revolving fund to be used in the rehabilitation of historic buildings. That,
That went back.
we don't have that yet,
No.
right?
That's what we're
So-
talking about using some of the TIF money from Medicom, so
Yes.
to be able to set that fund up. Which I like.
I think that's a great idea because a lot of cases the money is coming from the historic district, from the restaurants within the historic district.
Yeah, you'd mentioned that, Sean, a piece. Is there, I know that the state is very itchy about restricted funding. In other words, it would be, you know, for the town, I'm looking at our town
Yes.
council member here, you know, it's taking money from one place and earmarking it is, I know, a problem at the state level. I don't know how that would be at the town council.
And that's where the TIF comes in. So TIF money is specifically earmarked for something, and so that was put into legislation a few years ago. I think Middletown went to battle on that one. And so if you just establish a district and you can use tax increment financing within that district, that's what it's for. So you can earmark tax increment finance.
From, for example, restaurants in the historic district.
I'm
or
not sure about that, but I know like, so Medicom, we wanted to use tax increment financing.
Right,
And so that's, it's like, so they'll, what would happen on Medicom is they'll look at the taxes now for a property. And if a developer comes in and then obviously they improve this property, the taxes are gonna go from this base to this. The increment between it then can be earmarked for specific uses. Per the General Assembly this was a change a few years ago. So
Yeah,
you
and-
could earmark it for something
You
like
know,
this,
right now it goes into the general fund.
right?
So-
So, yeah,
right, and that's I mean, that's generally the politically, you know, the political approach that most folks like, and not saying it's
It
right.
gives them the flexibility to move it around.
So how would what would the language be there than what we have? Set up a revolving fund based on,
The 1%, the source, you mean, based on the source that we get from the 1%?
yeah, whatever the source is.
yeah, I don't think we.
Because you just setting up a revolving fund to be used in the rehabilitation, and it's like, where does that money come from? That's.
Yeah, I think the only time you can earmark it, it would be the TIP funding. And so you'd have to do,
But it might not only be TIF funding. I mean, it could be TIF funding be utilized, but it might be something other than that. They use real estate transactions, high real estate transactions, to take a cut off of that.
Yeah, Little Compton does that.
Right, so there's,
Space.
but I think you'd leave that to the town council within their budgeting to say X amount percent to whatever you wanted to do would go to this fund annually. So I think keeping it broad right now as an action item, setting up the fund, but we don't want it to be the issue like what was the other fund that's been empty for 20 years? The housing fund or something like that that's been empty.
Yeah, right.
So we don't want that. So we can open a fund, but apparently there's another fund that doesn't have $1 in it, has never had $1 in it. And so that, I think that's the,
Well, given the budget issues that I heard just a little bit about last month, what's the likelihood that there could be approval for TIF money or any of these other sources to be used for this purpose?
Well, tip money, I think, would be there, but, you know, other sources to me, you know, right now in this economic climate, don't seem to be
yeah, I
something.
mean,
that's-
the only way to generate more tax money is to develop. And the more mixed use commercial, right, or raise taxes, and please don't do that, ours are already,
I just wanted to know that,
let's not do that. But yeah, I mean, that's the one thing about like limiting development in areas, there are other things that happen as a result, so the more economic opportunities that you provide in the town, particularly in, you know, business and commerce, because they're paying a higher percentage of taxes than residential. It's just, and so that was the goal of the Medicom plan, is if we put it in an area that's already not actually very aesthetically pleasing and very underutilized, that increases the taxes. It provides more opportunities for the whole town. The TIF is so that we can then use those tax increases that we don't have now for things like this fund and other stuff that we have never been able to.
and
To
that's a key element, I think, in the Medicom proposal.
Right.
Because, you know, I hear all these people talking about, you know, we need more affordable housing, we need, you know, there's only so much land that we've got. There's only so much, you know, it's like, just because the population grows doesn't mean that we have to grow buildings and apartments, because, you know, it's like, we're not an anthill, you know? You've gotta be reasonable about that, but I do think that's why that Metacom was so important, because we don't have a lot of opportunities for development. And that is a key element in this. I mean, even if it weren't developed the way the vision was originally promoted, that's a huge hunk of very valuable land that's going for naught right
It
now.
also has the elevation.
Yeah, right. I mean, okay, well, you've got that, right, Allison? So,
Just, you know, from another angle, there could be future sources of funding. Like in my hometown, they now have marijuana sales, so they're taxed that. And they found a new use for that money. It didn't go into the general.
yeah,
I mean, because so,
They need more benches.
right.
But that's gonna be like minor. We asked when we were talking about it's a minor, that's stuff like that. I mean, anything besides development and commercial development, it's minor and it won't make a dent.
well, the one thing though is like in Little Compton, they have a percentage of each real estate transaction. They use that to fund their open space purchases. And that's been very successful. And essentially that's what's happening in Warren, you know, like we've now moved from houses that sold originally from our, you know, for 125,000 to 500,000, you know, and so that real estate transaction fee is significant. And I think could, you know, that's, I mean, I'm of two minds about this. There's historic protection and then there's also open space protection. And that's another part of this comprehensive plan, you know, so I don't want to, that's why I'm a little concerned about earmarks. I don't want to see that, you know, see us put it all in one pot.
We have a real estate transaction.
Wait, we really, on lot, there's a state, statement of the tax, it's over 600,000.
But we really can't compare ourselves to Little Compton, and that property taxes are so much lower. So much lower.
Yeah, well, they don't have that. They don't have the services. They don't have the,
They don't have, I think they have like a handful of small businesses. When I worked with all the towns. I
yeah,
mean,
and they
that's
don't,
why.
they don't have the school, you know, I mean, it's.
Yes, they pay the schools.
Are we talking about imposing real estate transfer tax on top of what I consider coming from the west, really high property? Now, you know,
It's a one-time fee, you know.
I'm excited.
One-time fee.
Yes, but we have.
It's
an
not a-
aging
it's not a
population.
tax
Here's the thing, that we have an aging population and taxing it's gonna be the tax of the seller. So right now, we already have a low. Like, we don't have enough properties for new people to move in. We're trying, Metacom's trying to encourage people to age in place, but maybe not in their huge home. That encourages them to stay in the home because they don't want to have to take a huge tax cut to move to maybe a smaller condo or something, even though it's better for them. And then you lose that family house, and that's why we have like 500 kids under the age of 18. That's it and more. So there's kind of, you know what I mean? So I think there are different things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that is one option that, you know, we haven't looked at, and it's among the things, how you fund a fund, you know, and that you have to be creative in terms of what you're doing. And, you know, people that are buying houses that are $1 million plus are more able to shoulder a little bit more. It's one of the costs of moving here, you know. It's
Right, that's not historic section.
yeah. Okay, the
Now on page 5, adaptive use and renovation really should be restoration for historic properties, not renovation.
we're
State law.
and I see restoration. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
So we owe units that are involved in funding.
All right.
The law.
Yeah, I think we leave it there. We
Yes,
fund it,
and I
then we
think
don't know how to
further-
fund it, but we'll leave it there, just.
Leave it there and then
We'll figure out how to fund it.
Well, no, I mean, I think examine strategies for funding, you know, or
Options, yeah, strategies, options, yeah.
establish, identify options to,
Establish.
fund a revolving fund.
I mean,
Let me introduce you to myself.
it's that action word again, like.
Again,
So I think we're going into Austin Powers territory here.
again, don't weaken that first word, which
I was
is
gonna
set
say,
up,
right. Yeah,
which is a good action verb.
Yeah.
because if you, otherwise, talking about it is a checkbox,
Yeah.
just
Talk
talking about
it,
it.
talk about it.
All right, HC 6.
I think it's good.
So again, this was written when Main Street was essentially empty, 5 years ago or whatever, and they're literally, every storefront was occupied over COVID, which makes no sense at all, but it's true.
But this isn't talking about empty store, this is talking about improving the appearance of properties.
Which still
As
there's.
opposed to filling.
Right.
I mean, so I get the point that, 10 years ago, we had a lot of empty storefronts on Main Street, you don't. And currently, you don't. But you don't still have a lot of distress,
Yeah, and
facades and stuff.
yeah, and Bob was able to get money for, some of those crummy places on Child Street. Yeah, so I think this makes sense. I mean, it's, one hopes that those people who were given money for the facade improvements will have their feet held to the fire to actually do something with those buildings.
Oh,
as
no,
opposed-
the historic commission oversaw every one of them.
Well, there's now just like some curtains in one of the one that used to be on Child Street, I'm talking about.
We did whole facade.
Yeah, no, it looks great, but there's a couple of empty commercial, I don't know what they're gonna, the outside looks good, but there's,
Well, no, I think that one is there, they have like a studio in there, right?
Yes, yeah.
They just- Yeah, they operate inside, but they don't have, it's not like a
Redid the
retail
facade.
frontage, yeah.
They redid the facade.
yeah, but I mean, it'd be nice to do something with the windows too, you walk
Oh, we
by.
did the mural.
No, I got that. You walk by, if you look into the building, it looks like it's a rummage sale.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
That's what I'm saying. It's like,
Yeah.
you got all this money for a facade and you're not even
Which one
gonna,
is it?
it's like the person who.
Well, it went into the actual building. That's what I'm saying.
Right, no, I get it, I understand it, it's just, it's like, I'd like to see somebody who has the community spirit to also do that. That was like, the old Tavares building, the guy finally put up paper in front of the broken bicycles that were in there, I mean, that's okay, but it's not really what we're looking for, we're looking for somebody who cares about the community.
Well, all the buildings on Main Street are historic, so.
Yeah, so I mean, I
HC 6 really, should be completely reworded theoretically and, says, essentially, restore the front facades or what have you. To their historic, appearance or something to that effect, because. Like I wrote here, subjective, what's attractive to one person is completely subjective.
Well, it was that the action is to implement a facade improvements loan program, which has been done.
Yeah, and so I think that's where we talk about so with what you're saying with the guidelines. We are then going to have to implement guidelines for the historic district that then will have to be enforced. And so you might grandfather a property in, but if you want to make an improvement, then you have to abide by that new policy moving forward. This would then just encourage people to maybe not, not to take that grandfather, but try to make improvements because they would be able to get some money to do so.
So that's already in place, right? I mean, technically, that's actually how.
So in other words, to get the facade improvement money, you have to be.
Right.
Yeah.
That was
Well,
the-
even if you just
That was
want to make changes to it.
Yeah, so that was a specific program with ARPA, so there was never a policy in place. You guys kind of did that under that one grant funding, but this will implement it forever.
So maybe we should say a permanent facade. improvement.
Yeah.
Right, I think that's.
Okay,
There's always been an attempt to provide facade improvement money, and we usually would get it from CDBG money.
right.
And that's kind of dried up, and that has to be pursued heavily. That requires you know, a planner or someone in that planning office to pursue those funds. But we've had a lot of trouble, with facade improvement, because it was matching funds and none of the people that own the properties wanted to hit that match. The most recent facade improvement program was so successful because it was an out and out.
Straightforward grant,
Straightforward
right.
grant. I'm not saying we shouldn't pursue this, but I'm just adding that as sort of perspective on what we try to do.
And then if Warren ever falls out of the LMI criteria, then we lose that altogether.
So I mean, we've already got facade improvements loan program. Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying.
It's a lofty goal. I mean, it's a good goal to have.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to keep it there because it's, you know, I mean, implement isn't the correct word because we've already implemented it a number of times. So it's continue.
Actually, it's to create, because we don't have it. What we had from ARPA was just a temporary shot. in the arm.
And I,
Yeah, it was
okay,
just
so
a
create,
one-off.
It's already-
and I would say loan/grant,
That's
because,
why I had loan text / grant text. for it.
yeah, okay.
Sure.
And I'm not even so sure that that shouldn't be the policy. That, you know, that replaces HC6.
Well, you're drilling down to it.
It is cut off here. Just so,
Did
I just-
expand.
yeah. Improve the attractiveness of distressed properties in the Main Street area to promote the area's visual appeal, no, that's not even right, visual appeal and economic vitality.
Yeah,
But I can tweak that based on, you know, your conversation as far as attractiveness might be too subjective, but maybe more,
improve
the
distressed
restoration
properties. How about
historically.
just taking out the attractiveness of improved distressed properties in the Main Street area to promote the economic and the rest of the language you read?
Yeah, that's
That way you take out the attractiveness because that is kind of like a,
redundant.
you know.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Ensure downtown Warren remain a top destination for residents and visitors.
That's one of those like.
Huh?
Yeah, right. Make it double awesome.
You know, again, that word, ensure, it's like.
Yeah, well,
Um,
it's the stuff that people take to get fat, you know.
Yeah. You're over 65.
Yeah, right, take some insurance.
You get a free insurance.
It's made from jellyfish and you know what they do.
I know this action item,
You know what that means, though, man.
So should we just take it HC7? I'm like moving down the list here.
and the action item with it.
Yeah, just because
Yeah.
that, with what you just said with the statewide plan, it doesn't make sense. Now we were just trying to tie it back to the corridor since they won't let us do it. We might as well just remove it.
Yeah, I would.
No, I just don't think it, yeah, I think that can come out.
I know the action item was something, yeah, that was, I was trying to, again, tie in market to Metacom
Yeah.
plan with this
No, I
historic
agree.
element, and I know when it was originally in the draft, there was some concerns with that language, and I had softened it, but maybe just striking it.
take it out.
It's
Right,
not
because you're just
helpful.
trying to tie it back to the.
Yeah, so.
Or
Encourage,
even tied it
Fixing the
to
building.
the other ones or something.
yeah. Encourage consolidation of local volunteer organizations, plural, focused on historic and cultural preservation to achieve long-term viability and success. Work with partners to apply for grants to preserve, conserve, and protect buildings, landscapes, and other artifacts of historical significance in Warren.
Fred, before we talk about HC8, I completely missed whatever was contemplated with HC7. There was about 4 or 5 people all talking at once, and
It was that
Overly broad.
it's an overly broad policy, and then the action associated with it is too closely tied to the Metacom Avenue corridor. It's like a reach to say, that somehow Metacom is going to create this problem in the historic
Okay,
district
was there any sort of, so what's the consensus then?
to take it out.
Probably get rid of
This is
it.
checking.
Okay, I agree with that. Thank you for summarizing.
Hey, no problem.
So how about for HCH say support local volunteer organizations, blah, blah, blah. And-
Well, I mean, I will tell you, I authored this one because, there's nothing that upsets me more than wasted energy. And, when you've got groups going in different directions and speaking with different voices in a town this small, it weakens the nation,
Well, one way to look at it is that there are different committees. There's a committee.
I understand that, but there's a need for those committees to operate in conjunction and not, allow. There has been, I think we have suffered as a result of historic groups not working together toward a common goal. You have your individual goals. There's nothing wrong with that. But the sense that they're not working together or talking to each other on major issues is,
I think that's a very outdated view because they just literally collaborated on this.
yeah, at my insistence, I said,
19.
I know, I said to Alec before, after sitting here in these meetings and listening to a variety of voices, I said, you've got to pull these folks together. And I'm not taking credit for it, but yes, it pulled together because of that. But it was a very clear picture of the fact that the historic groups had allowed this to happen. I mean, those buildings were rotting away for 30 years. Who was paying attention? You've got to do a.
Strategy, I'm sorry, and I have to put you back on that one. It did not look like the buildings were falling down. That is not true.
No,
You
no,
had a store in there, it was always.
I understand. No, what I'm saying is, what I'm saying is, I'm not blaming anyone. I'm saying that this comprehensive plan is a time, not just to say, let's support the status quo, but to change the status quo and to say, how can we do a better job as historic groups? Could we take an inventory of all of the houses on Water Street? With, if you want to go back, you could say, if somebody had been looking at what was going on there. Well,
It's not government.
right,
For
they complete,
25 years, our groups have been trying to save the district. And literally financially investing, putting our retirements on the line, doing everything. I mean, we've done it all. We have done it all.
but I'm not, and so this is the next step. I mean, I'm not saying that, I'm not denigrating what you've done. Yes, in fact, that's been wonderful, but what we're seeing now is a need for a more consolidated effort. Why wouldn't it make sense to
Hang
talk?
on a minute. First of all, when you're talking about consolidating, I'm just looking at the language, local volunteer organization. Well, that doesn't say town commissions. I mean, the town isn't gonna be consolidating private organizations, so that's an issue.
Right.
No.
Thank you. And aside from all that, like, the three groups that do exist, have vastly different missions. And no.
What, vastly?
Yes, yes.
That to me is, that's,
Well, no, it's true. All right, you have one group, the Massasoit Historical Association, which was formed in 1907 or whatever to oversee the spring. Okay, to monitor the spring, the stone, the plaque that's down at the end of Baker Street. That's why they formed, was to preserve that little tiny, they own a tiny little piece of land right there.
but they're doing more than that now, right?
Yes, in 1976, they bought the Maxwell House.
Okay, so
their
that's,
mission.
yeah.
That's their entire mission. They don't do townwide advocacy. They don't do funding of grants to buildings or any of that. That is their mission.
They're not active.
That's their mission.
You know,
They're never
it's
going to.
very insular.
Yeah, well, then maybe they're not part of it, but you certainly have.
They did in.
Right, and that's a good thing. So why would, we can take out the word consolidation, encourage cooperation, collaboration.
What they're actually saying is don't come to the town and ask for 3 separate donations. We're gonna now split your. That's what this is really saying.
We don't ask for donations, but,
Yeah.
yeah.
So-
That
so
was the
before
point.
COVID, It's been about 5 years.
No, I mean, I think
They did realize that there is a lot of collections, events, programming, etc., that these 3 groups do and have. And that they should be shared so that each group is at least aware of what the other groups are doing and their body memberships are aware of what the other groups are doing and have the ability to participate in all of the different.
I sort of see that, but I remember there was one time where there were 2 events going on almost at the same time from 2 different organizations in the town. And that is, that as a donor, as a potential supporter, you look at it and you say, who the hell is doing what? So that's all I'm asking. All we're saying here is,
But I think I'm just trying to update you on the actual reality of where it is specifically on the ground right now. So you have this group called Historic One,
That meets monthly
which
with representatives from each of those agencies.
which was representatives of each of those groups, and they all provide what they're doing at the moment, and their programming and collections and everything else. And so that now you can go to one website and see what all these different groups are doing with their programs and their collections and so
Right.
forth. Including the library, which is now been digitizing their entire museum.
yeah, no, I'm following all this stuff. It's just, I'm saying as an outside, as someone looking at this from the outside, it's difficult to parse that all out. And if,
The Warren Heritage Foundation came after, because they wanted to restore the church. And Warren Preservation Society said, we already own a building, we don't want to take on the church. It was too big of a deal, and for volunteers. So they decided to split off and do their own 501c3. I can't stop that.
no, we're not asking you to stop. More importantly, it's just, and if this is going on, then have it continue, do more.
Right.
I mean, that's all. I tell you though, at the 119, 113, we heard a multiplicity of voices, often uninformed, often not coming from the same, and it weakened the case. So if you're able to pull together and understand the situation, you can have a stronger voice. That's all I'm saying. I mean, that was just as simple
You
as
did
that.
not hear 3 separate voices from 3 separate organizations. They all represented one person, which was the woman who was the lawyer. Jennifer.
That was at the very end.
At the
That's what I'm saying. No, but I mean, it finally did pull together. But believe me, I sat through weeks or months of.
That was, but they had no other official representation outside of that.
No, I
It
understand
was
that.
just the community at large.
Yeah,
Let's get back to like this item is possible. So when you say encourage,
yeah.
what does that mean?
Yeah.
I'm having difficulty with, what does that mean?
I agree.
From a town's perspective, well, how are we as a town supposed to encourage that? I just don't understand that. Well,
I guess, I think by saying to somebody, I mean, and maybe it's been done, maybe you're heading in the right direction. It certainly didn't seem it at various times when the planning board has talked about something. I rarely hear, I mean, Davison's a great voice, but I think of him as an individual coming forward. I don't think, I don't see the kind of collective argument, and if it's there, it helps. It can help the
Wait a
town.
minute, wait. So we're drawing a lot of, it seems like this particular policy, at least from your perspective, Fred, correct me if I'm wrong, is informed by our recent experience with 119 update.
No, it's more than that. It's really,
Years before.
it's a number of times when something is happening in the town. If there's a more coherent voice,
But
that can benefit.
Hold that word. I want to talk about that. So a coherent voice from multiple organizations doesn't seem to me to be something we should be trying to encourage. If these different organizations might have slightly different missions, or even if they're almost the same, they could conceivably take a different position on any given application.
Absolutely.
So I don't care that they came and had different voices at varying times during the hearings, whatever, that's the way it goes. I don't get it.
Well,
I think
it
Fred-
certainly didn't convince you. It did, I mean, it was like.
What? Listen.
All right,
Well,
again,
let me
I
just,
mean, I'm willing to take it off the thing. I did think that coming together with an attorney was benefited the town and benefited the historic protection of the town.
Well, I
And-
would like to say that we sort of hope that we never have to spend $10,000 to protect ourselves from the town.
let's not talk about like that application is under appeal. Can we just stop talking?
Oh,
about
yeah,
it
sorry.
like this?
But anyway, that, I mean, it was, and that's why I was trying to keep it open. There's a confusion about what the groups are doing, and it just seemed to me to make sense. If the town could talk to a group, and if that's historic Warren, it would provide an open line of communication between the historic groups rather than going to each individual one.
And Fred, if I could, I remember this conversation from last year, and I think one, the coherent voice, but I think the other rationale or reason you were bringing it forward was in a way to make sure the like long-term success of the organization, the concern of like redundancy and burden on, having multiple administrative responsibilities and lots of volunteers for each of the organizations. If there were some, a couple organizations that felt like maybe collaborating or combining so that it ensured their long-term success. So you don't need as many volunteers or duplicative, like having redundant efforts. So I think it was that too, that
Yeah,
concept
oh, for
of
sure.
making sure that, if it made sense, if there was that
Yeah, but again,
opportunity and if
it's like,
it benefited. No, and
no,
and that
nobody's
was
trying
not.
to force anybody to do anything. I was
Right,
just
it's a
looking
private
at it.
organization. I think that's why the word encourage was there, and it was more like in that the action item would just be dialogue. If
Yeah.
community leaders,
Plan worthy, I mean, like, I don't even know where, if even.
Maybe it isn't. It just, again, it's.
because you
if-
want to
if
have
you-
a strong, local historic part of it, like we talked about earlier, wanting advocates, that's a lot of success in historic preservation is through advocacy. And so we want to make sure we have local organizations that advocate on behalf of historic preservation, their long-term success and viability and collaboration.
To Brett's point, what does the town, official body of the town do to do that?
Right.
Well, again, it's like, it would make it easier to say, come forward, here's the, whatever the issue is that we are facing. This is how we view it. And I think it just gives you a more powerful voice. I was involved in all kinds of student activist groups when I was a youngster, and that to speak with one voice got you a lot farther with the administration, whoever you were dealing with, than to have a series of groups. So coalitions to me were very
I think
effective.
these groups know that, and I think they already know that, they just proved it, honestly, so, but I think to Brett's point, like, what does an official body like a town government do to do that? Like, I don't know.
Nor should they.
Yeah, I don't think they should either. Like,
It's 9:10.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to get going, guys. I mean, we can sit and
Yeah.
stew on this all night, but I mean, that, we're trenching into free speech issues. There's a lot of stuff there about that.
Well, I don't think we're going that far. No, I mean, for God's
I
sake.
mean,
Anyway, let's let it go, because it's like you folks represent the folks who care enough to come out and engage in this. So, that's really what we're looking for, to have that engagement, not after the fact, during it. And so, that's, if we can leave this out, I mean, I think it makes sense for you to think about coalition building, but if that's not something you want to do, we can't, it doesn't,
See why you-
for now. For once,
So, do you want to end this here?
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
You don't want to go through the whole narrative?
Oh, Christ.
Public comments on the narrative.
No, and what I would do is I would encourage you to send the information that you have, any comments beyond this, to Allison. And as soon as possible, please, to give us enough time to look at them prior to a meeting.
Yeah, I'll make these updates and I'll also, these smaller changes throughout the narrative that were submitted, I'll go through those, make those tweaks, but I think if there are like significant, if there's additional content or significant, if there's new action items you feel are left out that are important that you think the town should implement, if you get those to me in advance, and I can, incorporate those for the planning board's consideration next month. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn,
I,
all in favor, aye.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate.
That was awesome.
Sure. Time, dialogue.
Did I say double awesome?
Yeah, don't do that anymore.